Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little different. A day you probably wouldn't survive in Han China. Quiet, meticulous, and ruled not by swords but by stationery. A time when ink could outlast emperors. Brushes were groomed more carefully than hair, and one misplaced dot could send a clerk back to grindstone purgatory. So before settling in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if this slow drift through the past is your kind of night. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is right now. I love seeing the map of night unfold. Shanghai to New York, midnight to morning. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum. Let the room get smaller and the table in front of you get larger. Lacquer a little scuffed, lamp breathing amber, a bundle of bamboo slips tied like a calm promise. If you think your worst morning routine is bad, imagine starting the day by shaving the tip of a writing brush until it's the width of a whisper, then grinding ink so patiently the stone begins to remember your name. Welcome to Han China's Clerk's desk, the least dramatic place that quietly ran an empire. Tonight's journey goes gently. We'll begin where the day actually begins here, not with trumpets, but with tidying, straightening slips, testing bristles against the pad of a thumb, rolling the wrist until the character lands like a soft foot on wet shore. Later, we'll wander into mirrors and combs, hair oils, and garments that rustle like polite weather. After that, tax days that move like seasons, grain measured by baskets, tallies cut into wood, storerooms sealed with twine and a nod. And finally, the softest room of all, music spaced like stars, where the kin speaks in low forest tones and sleep is a perfectly reasonable audience member. If the eyes grow heavy, let them. The work will continue without complaint. The past is unhurried. And tonight, it won't mind keeping watch while you drift. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Han China. The good news, the roof hasn't leaked, the lamp oil lasted the night, and the magistrate hasn't invented a new form yet. The bad news, the brush has gone sullen again. The bristles slept crooked, and they're going to make you earn every stroke. The room is not grand. It doesn't need to be. A woven mat, a low table polished by wrists and years, a lamp whose flame is the size of a patient thought. Morning arrives as a pale square on the floor, dust moving like shy fish through its light. Before the day can begin, the desk must become a place. So you straighten, slips of bamboo in a neat bundle, string coiled like a promise, inkstone set exactly where the hand knows it without looking. Order first, words later. Ink is not a color yet. It is a stone and a stick and a shoulder turning and turning. A measured breath of water settles in the inkstone's well. The ink stick, black, fragrant, more patient than any person, meets the stone with a sound like quiet rain. This is not grinding. This is remembering. Circles slow as a monk's footfall. Grey deepens to evening, evening to a certainty of black that makes the slip seem bright enough to think. When the smell blooms, smoke and resin, old pine and new promise, you stop. To go further would be vanity. Vanity's smear. Bamboo is honest. It is light, it is rigid, it keeps its shape and its grudges. Each slip is a finger's width and the length of a hand, smoothed along the grain, edges tamed just enough to spare a sleeve. Silk flows like a river under the brush, but it's the river of a nobleman's purse, not a clerk's. So bamboo it is, tough, affordable, fussy. You test one with an invisible stroke, hovering, letting the wrist find its weight like a bird making peace with a narrow branch. Characters do not march here. They leave footprints that agree with each other. Back at the table, a hair has strayed from the brush again. The knife makes the gentlest cut you will make all week. The tip sharpens into intention. The bristles are animal patience bound to a sliver of wood. They ask for just enough water, no more. Too dry, they scratch and sulk. Too wet, they bloom and betray you. On the pad of a thumb, you test the point until a single strand whispers its redness. In the bowl, the rinse water has turned the color of diluted midnight. It is poured out and replaced with something clear enough to invite care. This is what the job is, most days, replacing the water before the sky notices. There is a ritual for posture as well as ink. The back makes a small argument with the mat, straight but not proud. Elbow anchored, wrist loose, shoulders forgetting themselves. Breathing trims the line you cannot see. One slow exhale before the brush lands, as if a small wind had to pass over a pond before it could reflect truthfully. The first character is not a word. It is a door. Vertical stroke steady as rice stalk. The crossbar arrives like a bridge that knows its width. Misery in hand china is not always hunger and chill. It is sometimes the awareness that even ink has a better memory than those who carry it. You sort the slips by purpose, tax names, grain tallies, routine notices, each bundle a quiet season. Some will travel to storerooms where mice consider literacy irrelevant. Some will meet a Yarman seal and pretend to be immortal. You tap each stack into alignment. Straight edges behave better in courtyards. The brush returns to the stone between lines, a kiss rather than a drink. You do not stir the well. You coax the edges, keeping the body of the ink untroubled. The lamp gives a slow breath. A draught tries the flame, and you shield it with the back of a hand, not out of tenderness but habit. In a clerk's morning, rescue is practical. You copy a name that has already been copied 3 times this month. The family has a new infant. The tax is not new. The characters tighten at the corners. Where a wealthier brush would play, yours keeps a straight face. A blot threatens at the tail of a stroke. The blot will ruin the line. The line will ruin the slip. The ruined slip will ruin your mood and someone else's patience. A wisp of dry cloth, kept for this one purpose, skims the surface. Not a rescue, a postponement. The string that will bind these slips later sits coiled, watching. It remembers the knots you like and the way your left hand hesitates before closing them. Binding is a promise to the future that the past won't fall apart in its hands. This is what administration is, keeping time in little fences. There are rules older than your desk, older than your village. The center of a character must sit like a stone in a bowl, low, calm, inevitable. Hooks do not snag, they return, courteous. Dots land like swallows, visible, brief, perfectly placed. Someone once wrote all this on silk and called it instruction. You are writing it on bamboo and calling it Tuesday. Occasionally, a slip misbehaves, grain in the wrong direction, tiny ridge where a knife was unkind. You compensate with angle and patience, tilting the brush so the belly of the bristles carries the ink across rebellious fiber. There is a satisfaction in taming a surface that doesn't want your words. It feels like convincing a stubborn neighbor with tea rather than argument. Between bundles, you clear the table's small debris, a curl of bamboo, a drop that has dried to a glossy eye, one unruly hair from the brush that has dreams of freelancing. The knife is wiped. The inkstone's rim is dried so no surprise rivulet will ambush the next character. The lamp wick is nudged so its breath is steady, not greedy. The day becomes a sequence of courtesies toward things that cannot thank you. Outside, someone drags a broom along a threshold. The sound is a slow rhythm, easy to ignore until it aligns with the movement of your wrist. For a moment, calligraphy and sweeping agree on what time it is. You finish a bundle and lay the string across it without tying. Wet ink deserves patience. Your palm smells faintly of pine, ash, and something like rain that decided to become permanent. There is a ledger to start, columns drawn with a brush that has been flattened into a ruler by practice. You breathe, then place the verticals first. The horizontals come later, like roofs added to walls that have proven themselves. A small slip tucks under the ledger to keep the table from printing its grain through your lines. Someone long ago learned that trick and did not bother to write it down. Good knowledge travels by hands, not proclamations. The bowl of rinse water darkens again. You empty it once more, careful not to splash the mat. Stains become maps no one asked for. Fresh water falls quietly. The inkstone's well looks deep enough to last until mid-morning, assuming care. Care is the only luxury allowed here that no one begrudges. By the time the bell from somewhere else decides to mention the hour, the desk has gone from surface to engine. Slips breathe in neat stacks. The brush point is a taut modesty. The ink is a knight you can hold. If life in hand china insists on its miseries, It also offers this, a morning in which small perfections are permitted, and the empire is briefly made of paper that behaves. You lift the next slip. The first line waits for the first breath. The lamp leans closer, as if it has something to read. The morning does not hurry. It files its edges and waits for you to match them. The desk has become a place. Now the tools become themselves. A brush is only hair and wood until a hand teaches it to remember. You roll the shaft between finger and thumb, feeling for the seam where the grain was shy. The ferrule is simple, thread wound tight, the knot hidden like a good intention. Bristles taper to a single thought. You breathe on them once, a small cloud, and they settle as if persuaded. There is a rule you whisper without sound. Water first, then ink, then air. You dip the tip in clear water and lift it slowly, counting the heartbeats it takes for a droplet to hesitate and return to the bowl. Too fast, and the brush is thirsty. Too slow, and it is plotting against you. A touch to the rim shakes free what would become betrayal. Then the ink, only the edge of the well, never the center. The point drinks, the belly refuses seconds. On the pad of your thumb, you press and twist gently, shaping the bristles back to a cone sharp enough to sign a promise. Bamboo slips weight like thin doors you mean to open without squeak. You test angles in the air, writing an invisible line so the wrist can find its story. The first stroke lands as if the table had moved up to meet it. Downward, steady, no flourish. The second crosses not as a scold but as a bridge. Where the ink gathers at the end, you lift a heartbeat sooner than habit wants. Restraint is the seam that keeps a day from fraying. Between lines, maintenance hides in plain sight. The brush returns to the water, not to bathe but to blink. One soft dip, one slow press against the bowl's inner curve, the point reshaped, the excess refused. A cloth, old, clean, faithful, waits at the corner to touch away the drop that forgot it was extra. The inkstone's rim gets a quick swipe with a fingertip. What clung there could have turned into a wandering river across your next character. You learn to anticipate the physics of trouble and answer it with small courtesies. A hair rebels. It will not be scolded back into place. You take the knife and breathe like someone about to cut a single grey from a friend's head. The slice is not aggressive. It is a subtraction toward accuracy. The brush resumes its shape, a spire, not a broom. Tools respond to kindness that looks like discipline. You begin a column of names. Each character is a promise to be the same height as its neighbor without being the same person. Your hand keeps time more than it keeps ink. One breath for the vertical, half a breath for the cross, a brief held note for the hook that returns like a guest who knows when to leave. When the belly of the brush begins to speak louder than the point, you know the line will thicken into mood. Back to the well, graze the surface, reset intention. A clerk's authority is the confidence of the thin line that refuses drama. Outside, a cartwheel finds a rut and complains about it. The lamp answers with a deeper breath. You lean a fraction closer, not to squint but to make the world smaller. On the next slip, the grain changes its mind, and the stroke tries to feather. You roll the brush a quarter turn, letting a different slice of bristle carry the ink across the stubborn ridge. The line holds. Not triumph, just agreement. The string lies next to the growing stack, a patient future. Before it can bind, there is the seal to consider. You set out the red paste and the wooden stamp with characters carved in mirror memory. The paste is thick, a small sunset in a shallow dish. You tamp it gently, turning the seal until the grooves are evenly fed but not glutted. On a practice shard of bamboo, you press straight down, then lift with a sigh. The imprint is crisp, no bleeding, no hunger. You wipe the edges of the seal with a scrap of silk that has lost its glory to this purpose, then set it down like a sleeping official. The paste lid returns with a tiny twist that means later won't be dry. Ink has weight you can feel before it shows its mind on the slip. In the slow drag of the brush, there is the story of yesterday's humidity and last night's cold. You adjust pressure the way a foot learns a path in the dark. Less here, more there, always listening. The wrist hovers a hand's width above the surface when you pull a long stroke. Gravity becomes an ally when you drop a dot. Where the line must pivot, the elbow whispers, and the shoulders refuse to help. They are heavy furniture. The wrist is the hinge. You draw guide marks that only you will see, breathing spaces between columns, a faint tick at the top margin where a title will sit later with the calm pride of alignment. The brush, flattened by a practiced press, becomes a ruler long enough for one line at a time. You lift and rotate and lift again, making horizontals that do not insist upon themselves. Under the ledger page, you slip a sacrificial slip so the table's wood grain does not play ghost in your careful geometry. Preventing noise is part of keeping quiet. The inkstones well shallows. You add water with a wetted fingertip, not a paw. Then the stick meets stone again, circles small as coins, sounds soft as distant rain imagining itself. The scent comes back, pine soot, glue, something like the afterlife of fire. You do not rush this part. Bad ink punishes in whispers for the rest of the day. When the black is the kind that makes light seem deliberate, you stop. You rest the stick at the stone's dry lip, not thunked into the pool where it would bleed its strength unattended. You retune the brush. Tip to water, tip to ink, press, twist, release. You count to 3 for the drop to vanish. You touch the point to the slip's edge, not to make a mark, but to prove that you could have. Then the copy resumes. Date first, place second, content last, so anyone bored enough to skim will be fooled into respect by the order. A blot threatens at the base of a vertical. You tilt the brush so the ink races to the other side of the cone and the point lands clean. Rescue again. Quiet. Immediate. Uncelebrated. Fatigue lives in the pinch between thumb and second finger. You loosen it with a small roll and let the ring finger join the grip for a few lines, the way a second ox might join a plough on a hill. You tell your hand a small lie, that after this bundle there will be tea. Hands work well on promises they half believe. Bamboo filings from a trimmed slip cling to the table's edge. You sweep them into a small pile with the side of your hand, then tip them into a clay dish that has become a cemetery for unwanted commas. The knife gets a quick kiss on the cloth, the blade wiped in a direction that respects both steel and skin. The lamp's wick is trimmed with a pinch so it burns a steady coin of light, not a feather. Even brightness deserves editing. One slip refuses you. The character breaks wrong. The ink pulls at the end like a regret that won't evaporate. You set it aside without ceremony. A ruin does not belong with the good. Later, when the ink is ghost dry, you will scrape it back with the knife's back edge, reducing the mistake to pale fibers that can be talked over with fresh intention. For now, the rhythm must not be made to apologize. There is a whisper of footsteps in the corridor, another clerk, not knocking, just existing. The sound passes, becomes memory. You use the moment to stand, to let the knees remember circulation, to look at the stacks from above. From there, the order pleases the eye like a field seen from a ridge. Rows true, paths clear, no vanity crops. You sit again. The mat sighs in the way only woven things can. You thread a length of string through the first finished bundle. The knot is the same one your teacher's teacher used, a loop that secures without strangling, easy to undo in winter when fingers are treacherous. You place the tied bundle aside, away from the lamp's warmth. Heat and paper understand each other too well. The brush returns to its stand, bristles pointing down so water won't sulk in the ferrule and rot the patience there. A second brush, coarser, kinder to broad lines, takes its place for headings and margins. It drinks less ink and makes more space. You let it. Not every tool needs to be a needle. Some mornings ask for a small broom made of hair. By now, the bowl of rinsed water looks like night trying on a mirror. You carry it to the doorway, tip it into a patch of dirt that drinks without opinion, and return with water that shows the bottom of the bowl as if honesty were easy. On the way back, you notice the air has warmed by the width of a breath. The lamp seems less necessary and yet also more loyal. You sit once more. The brush, the slips, the ink, the string, all of them have moved from object to accomplice. The hand has taught the brush, and the brush has taught the hand. Misery may be the architecture outside, tax tallies, winter drafts, a supervisor's soft disapproval, but here, for now, there is competence. The empire, in this room, is quiet enough to be written on. You lift the next slip. The line you are about to draw already exists in your wrist, waiting only for the courage of contact. By mid-morning, the room has learned your rhythm. The lamp no longer leads. Daylight does, washing the low table in a pail that makes black feel decisive. The work, however, refuses to congratulate itself. Bamboo demands humility from anyone who wishes to be remembered by it. Slips do not care how neatly your hair was bound, how carefully the brush was trimmed, or whether sleep visited. They remember only the pressure of your wrist and the order of your lines. The empire calls that memory record. You lay out 3 bundles: names to be tallied, grain to be measured, notices to be copied. Each bundle is a quiet petition for structure in a world that likes to fray. The string sits nearby, unknotted for now, as if to say, prove you deserve permanence. You begin with the grain because grain does not forgive enthusiasm. Numbers want the calm your breath can offer, or they become little lies that harden into taxes. Columns first, then headings, drawn with a brush trained to behave like a straight edge without forgetting it is alive. The bamboo under your hand is not a blank. It hums with a fine, hard patience. Where a surface would welcome a pen, this one negotiates. You lean a fraction, flatten the brush, and pull a pale line that marks a margin you will later pretend is inevitable. Nothing here is inevitable. Everything is arranged and then called natural. Names enter the ledger like small boats at the edge of a lake. Each character takes its berth, the stroke steady, the anchor set. Next to each, the measure, baskets, half baskets, the rare surplus that looks like bragging and reads like luck. For every number, a reason hovers that you will never write, whether illness, a brother gone to conscription, a child that took more rice than expected because it finally chose to live. Bamboo remembers what you write, not what you meant. The ink begins to speak in shades. Where you loaded the brush well, the line is velvet. Where you ask too much of the bristles, it goes grey, like a thought reconsidered mid-sentence. You resist the urge to fix with flourish. Flourish is how small mistakes become large ones. Instead, you pause, touch the tip to the ink's dark edge, shape the point once against the bowl, and return as if the interruption belonged there all along. The page accepts calm like a guest invited for tea who knows how to hold a cup. A slip misbehaves, one of those with a hidden knot that interrupts the stroke with a hairline rebellion. You feel it before you see it. The brush drags with a whisper of discontent. Tilt, lighten, let the belly, not the point, carry the ink across the roughness. The line holds together, not because it wanted to, but because you asked politely. You place that slip under the next as a reminder. Today is not a day to be clever. When a blot comes, and it always comes, it arrives like weather, not a catastrophe, simply a truth that ignores preference. The tail of a vertical darkens, pools. You lift sooner than your habit, then chase the excess with the thirsty corner of your cloth, not touching the mark, only the shine. The gloss dulls into behavior. You exhale the smallest victory a clerk is allowed. Somewhere, a supervisor will still say the tail is heavy. Somewhere, a rat will prefer this slip for its flavor. The bamboo will not care about either opinion. It will harden the ink to permanence and forget how much effort the saving took. You date a notice that will be read by a man who reads only to be seen reading. Your brush refuses to show disdain. Its job is to behave. The seal waits. You feed it red paste, press once to a practice shard, then kiss the lower corner of the notice with official geometry. The square blooms obediently. Authority loves predictable flowers. You wipe the seal's edges, lid the paste, and place the notice where sunlight will not humiliate it into pink. Between tasks, small chores hold the room together. You decant the night from the rinse bowl and return with water that looks like a soft opinion. The inkstone's well is coaxed back to depth. Circles, soft circles, the sound of patience rehearsing. The knife is wiped, the table brushed of bamboo crumbs that would print their accidental grammar into your careful lines. The lamp's wick, though less necessary now, is nudged into modesty. Brightness is not the point. Legibility is. A courier arrives in the corridor. not entering, just folding himself into a threshold and unfolding a list of demands with the weary courtesy of someone who knows the difference between important and urgent is academic. You take the list with two hands, nod as if the sequence is kind, and lay it aside in a place that means soon without promising a time. The empire has more directions than horses. Bamboo is cheaper than both. You return to the grain. Names from a village you have never visited. Columns that will outlive everyone in them unless fire argues otherwise. You wonder what these lines will mean when the person who drew them is a rumor. Perhaps a scholar will praise the consistency of your hand and miss the tremor you learn to hide. Perhaps a scribe will curse your small margins. Perhaps no one will read them at all, and the slips will line a trunk for someone's apricot stones. Bamboo does not mind being turned into furniture for seeds. Memory is a use, not a shrine. Your ring finger aches. You loosen the grip, rest the brush across the cradle of your other hand, and let the bristles point down so water will not sulk in their roots. A swallow of lukewarm tea tastes like a promise you made to yourself earlier. You do not remember the exact terms, only that they were reasonable. Reasonableness, in this room, is the pleasure permitted to those who cannot afford joy. Back to the ledger. A correction. Last month's half basket should have been 2/3. You lift the blade and scrape with the dull spine, easing ink back into powder. The fibers pale, not new, but willing. You breathe, then lay the new fraction where the old had been stubborn. If this were silk, the scar would be indecent. On bamboo, scars look like experience. The slip accepts the revision the way skin accepts a story preferred to the truth. From above, the finish stacks are histories pretending to be errands. String slips through holes you've oiled with a pin kept in a cloth fold. 3 threads for sturdiness, a knot that can be argued with in winter. You tie each bundle with the same measured pressure that makes good lines. Secure and showy, reversible. Permanence is the arrogance of stone. Paper must be allowed to change its mind. Light shifts. The room takes on the honest fatigue of a space that has done what it was designed to do. You place the brush back in its stand, bristles down, and slide the lid over the inkstones well, not airtight. Ink is a living mood and sulks when sealed. The knife returns to its sheath. The cloth is folded corner to corner, a square apology for everything it absorbed. On the top slip of the next bundle, you draw a single, careful character, today. It is a small defiance in a world that prefers dates and reign titles. You do not sign it, though the urge passes through your hand like a bird considering a branch. Bamboo does not carry gratitude. It carries marks. It will go into a shelf and become a future person's evidence that a morning once existed where a clerk made order out of fibers and soot. Outside, a bell remembers the hour. Inside, you gather the finished bundles with 2 hands and lay them where couriers expect them to be found. The table shows faint rings where cups wandered, a constellation of quiet indulgences. You do not clean them yet. Some maps are allowed to remain visible until afternoon. You lift the first slip of the final stack. The brush waits where you left it, trained and willing. Bamboo, indifferent and faithful, waits too. The line you will lay down is already alive in your wrist, asking only for the courage of another beginning. By late morning the room has settled into its narrow weather, lamp trimmed to a coin, daylight shallow and obedient, ink a tame night in a shallow well. The work has the look of progress without the sound of it. Bundles accrue a quiet gravity. The table carries the marks of usefulness, a faint ring where tea paused, a dark grain made darker by sleeve and time. Nothing here is dramatic. That is the point. Drama wastes ink. A new stack of notices arrives, tied with string that believes in itself. The courier leaves with a nod that says he has learned to respect the tyranny of sequence. You untie the knot and let the string coil where patience is kept. The top slip announces itself with flattery. Smooth, even, willing. It will betray you later. Nice surfaces often do. Before you write, you do the small things that keep the day from unraveling. The brush is combed with 2 fingernails, a musician tuning in the same key as the air. The bowl is emptied and refilled. Water should be honest when you ask it to remove mistakes. The inkstone's rim is wiped with the side of a finger so no surprise crescent will fall into a character and pretend to be meaning. The knife is set where habit can find it without looking away from a line. Order first, as always. Words later. You copy titles with the wider brush, the one that prefers confidence to detail. Headings don't need to be beautiful, they need to be believed. The strokes land with the calm of a door closing in a soft house. Then back to the fine brush, the point rehearsed to a single hair, the bristles trained not to gossip. The wrist finds its hinge. The elbow forgets it exists. The character for tack sits low and even, as if apologizing without yielding. The character for grain keeps its balance even when the brush insists on remembering the field. Somewhere down the corridor, a reed broom argues with a floor. The sound folds into your breathing. It would be simple to call this peace, but peace is expensive and this is free. This is maintenance. The empire, like the brush, works because someone is always doing something small at the right time. A supervisor appears as a shadow that believes in doors. He steps in only far enough to be considered present. His eyes take the room's measure, and the room survives the measurement. He points at a bundle and asks a question that answers itself. You lift the relevant slip, lay it flat, and let his gaze travel down lines that hold their posture. He nods the kind of nod that means you have saved him the effort of thinking aloud. He leaves. The doorway relearns how to be a rectangle. Praise does not enter, silence does. Silence is better. Ink thickens as if contemplating stew. You grind again, small circles, quiet rain. The smell rises, pine soot and glue, a sweetness that pretends it is not from smoke. You feed the well carefully. Too much water turns language into shadow. The stick rests at the dry edge so it will not bleed its strength into the puddle while your back is turned. You have learned to turn your back on as little as possible. A blot arrives, shy but certain. It swells at the end of a hook that should have returned with courtesy. You do not scold it aloud. Cloth touches shine, not stroke. The gloss fades, the line behaves, the world continues. You place the cloth down the way you might set a tired child on a bed, gentle, because gentleness costs less than replacement. You do not log the rescue. Bamboo will keep the record of what you intended, not what you prevented. There is a slip with a tear where the knife once asked too much. You align the wound with the margin and write around it, leaving the scar to belong to whiteness instead of a word. Not every hurt must be filled. Some need to be boarded. The lesson is not in a book. It resides in the hand that has ruined enough mornings to become cautious. You seal a notice that will tell a village something it already knows, that obligation is not seasonal. The paste is patient. The seal is consistent. The red square sits in the corner like an official who never raises his voice because he never has to. You clean the edges, twist the lid, and slide the notice under straight stone so it dries without curling. The stone is unremarkable. Many important things are. A fly attends, late to the meeting. It tours the rim of the inkstone and changes its mind. Even insects respect viscosity. You guide it away with the back of your hand and return to the column where fractions accumulate like weather reports. You correct one quietly. A scrape, a breath, a rewrite that looks inevitable. You place a small dot left of the character. A mark you and your own I will later read as remember this. No one else will see it. Private signals are the only luxury that does not offend. Your hand ties differently now, not in the grip but in the places memory lives. You give it a single minute of sky. The window cloth is lifted, light sharpens, dust performs its small theatre. The room looks briefly like a promise kept. You lower the cloth, not to dim, but to soften. Soft is where words sit best. A final bundle waits, census cursives, narrow columns that dislike drama. You adjust the brush thirst, 2 touches of water, 1 stroke of ink, a twist on the bowl's inner curve, the point made domestic. The characters fall into their lanes. You could write them with your eyes closed, but you do not. Familiarity is the first excuse of a mistake. At the edge of the table, the string has been pretending to be a snake. You pick it up, and it behaves like rope again. Holes are oiled, threads pass, knots remember themselves. 3 wraps, 2 turns, 1 pull, secure, and showy, reversible. You lay the bundles in a shallow stack that reads as a paragraph if seen from the door. This was done on purpose. You tend the tools the way one tends a guest one expects to see tomorrow. The fine brush is rinsed, shaped, and set bristle down to dry. The broader brush is cleaned with a gentler hand. The fat bristles store resentment if squeezed. The knife is wiped and sheathed. The inkstone is wiped around the well. The pull left like a moon in daylight. Visible, ignored. The cloth is folded corner to corner. Corners neat enough to persuade the next hour to be manageable. On a spare slip, you test the point one last time. A vertical, a dot, a small hook that returns without apology. You do not keep the test. You never keep the tests. Evidence of readiness is not a product. It is a mood. Outside, a bell notices noon. Inside, the room decides it has earned afternoon. You move the finished stacks to the shelf where couriers do not need to think. The shelf is a ledger in wood. It tallies competence without ink. Before you stand, you write a single line on a forgotten scrap, more ritual than record. Today behaved. The line is not for the empire. It is for the hand that will return tomorrow and for the desk that will wait. You tuck the scrap under the inkstone where no one will read it, including you. When you rise, the mat remembers your weight and forgives it. The table, relieved of its labors, looks suddenly older. In the corridor, the broom resumes its argument with dust. You step into the sound, carrying nothing that requires 2 hands. The morning has done what mornings do. Set small perfections against a large indifference and hope they hold until evening. Behind you, the lamp shrinks itself to a memory. The brush tips glisten, then dim. The ink cools into certainty. Bamboo, faithful, indifferent, incorruptibly literal, keeps what you asked it to keep. If daily life in Han China is surprisingly miserable, it is also predictably possible. And possibility, here, is written one quiet line at a time, by a hand that has learned to make the world behave for as long as the bristles stay wet. The morning from the clerk's room does not end. It thins into corridor light, turns a corner, and learns a different patience. Paper quiet becomes fabric quiet. Ink's pine-sweet breath hands the hour to sesame oil and ground rice, to wooden combs and the whisper of silk against a palm. If the empire is coppered on bamboo, it is also stitched on bodies. And bodies, like slips, must be prepared to be read. The house wakes in layers. First the stove's slow confession, then the clink of basins as a girl carries water that remembers the well in its chill. In the courtyard, sunlight touches the jars where last autumn's seeds steep in oil, darker now, perfumed by thyme and clove. A hairpin clicks against lacquer like a distant cricket. No one announces the day. Small sounds choose their places the way characters settle into a column, aligned, not loud. A mirror waits on a stand, polished bronze, faithful only to lighting and mood. It does not flatter, it reports. Beneath it, a tray holds instruments that know their work better than the hands that use them. Bone comb, horn pick, cloth puffs, a pinch pot with rice powder that looks like captured moonlight. The comb teeth are oiled just enough to promise obedience without slickness. Disobedience will come later from the weather, or from a thought that runs ahead of the hand. Hair is a river that must learn to hold a shape. It begins with oil, sesame or perilla, sometimes camellia if the year was kind. A single drop to the palm, warmed by breath, pressed into strands from root to patience. Oil carries more than shine. It carries the house's stories. The jar opened for weddings, the jar closed for mourning, the jar thinned in spring and generous in mid-autumn when the press runs strong. Fingers move like quiet weather through midnight, distributing softness where the night left knots. The comb follows, not to conquer but to negotiate. Wide teeth to find a path, fine teeth to make it official. Powder waits. Rice ground to silk, sifted and sun-dried, then scented with the ghost of osmanthus or the idea of lotus. On the skin, powder is not a disguise. It is an edit. Oily shines are eased into matte calm. The forehead becomes a field ready for expression to draw on it without glare. A cloth puff kisses along the temples and under the hinge of the jaw, places where worry pulls even before noon. The air changes. It smells like restraint. The bronze mirror gives back a face arranged for the day's reading. Brows are persuaded with a moistened brush and a pinch of soot saved from last night's wick. Not a line, a shadow of intention. Lips borrow colour from crushed safflower, bright at first, tamed with a fingertip and a thought of tea. Cheeks are left to their own decisions. Excess is a rumour that travels faster than couriers. Garments are selected in a logic of weather and errands. Linen for the layer that touches skin, clean even when mended, the mends themselves a testimony to skill no one praises aloud. Over it, a light robe if the sun promises civility, or a thicker weave if the morning remembers the north. Colour speaks softly, a green that hints at riverbank reed, a blue with enough indigo to recall evening without inviting melancholy. Patterns confine themselves to edges, clouds that never threaten rain, meanders that never lose their way. The sash is the sentence that makes the outfit read correctly. It ties not just fabric but posture. It asks the body to find its verb. Hair becomes architecture. Sections are divided with the horn pick, lifted and coaxed into loops that know how to hold themselves by remembering where to rest. A knot sits low for humility, high for ceremony, to one side only for evenings when laughter is expected and consequence is not. Hairpins slide in, not to glitter but to anchor, wood lacquered to deep mirror, bone carved with patience, occasionally a sliver of silver if the calendar allows brightness. The final pin clicks home with a sound the house understands as enough. In another room, an aunt folds powder into a small paper twist for later, discreet touch-ups carried like a secret. She labels nothing. The nose will know. Beside her, a child watches the ritual with the solemn hunger of apprentices, fingers twitching at each tool as if language itself lay in the lacquer. She is told to fetch the small box of cloves. She returns with two, the second unnecessary but accepted because abundance teaches less fear than scarcity does. Water, warmed on the stove shoulder, finds a basin and becomes a face's brief river. A cloth wrung to almost dry smooths the powder back into agreement where it caked at the nose's wings. The face is not a canvas today. It is a document under gentle revision. Outside the door, the street has already unfurled its errands. Vegetable sellers arguing in a minor key of commerce, a neighbour beating dust out of a mat, a courier's sandals discovering all the small stones they ignored yesterday. Inside, quiet persists, curated rather than natural. A sleeve is tested for length against a reach that knows baskets and doors. The hem remembers the last puddle it met and expects others. Hair oils Sheen convinces flyaways to become citizens. There are the small protections ordinary days require, a dab of camphor at the collar for crowded alleys, a touch of alum at the heel to keep sweat from becoming a story, a smudge of sandalwood behind the ear for no audience at all except the self who will need encouragement at mid-afternoon. These are not luxuries. They are the engineering of composure. Powder dusts the backs of hands, purely for feeling. The way rice-light skin against silk tells the mind that control is possible. The bronze mirror catches the room behind the face, the jar of needles, the roll of mending thread, the folded garments waiting their next lives as rags, then as polishing cloths, then as memory. Beauty here is not an argument with time. It is a pact with maintenance. The sash is tied, loosened, tied again until breath and fabric are amicable. The knot rests slightly off-center, a practiced imperfection that looks like ease and is actually study. The hair's final inspection is tactile. The hand reads for gaps the eye will miss. The last touch of oil is pressed to the crown, then brushed away to avoid arrogance. The scent that remains is an essay in lower case. Before the door opens, there is a pause that belongs to neither the house nor the street. It is the width of one inhale, long enough to remember the clerk's morning just across town, where bamboo has already begun to harden into history. Out here, history will be softer, powder on collars, oil prints on comb teeth, a garment's polished sleeve speaking low to a shop counter as silver changes pockets. The empire likes its records dry and rectangular. The household prefers them fragrant and folded. The door lifts. The light decides to be generous. A foot crosses the threshold, and with it 100 small decisions travel into the day. How to smell in a market without offending onions, how to shine without reflecting blame, how to speak in fabric that will be listened to by people who pretend not to notice. The house lets the mirror go dim. It has done its part. Outside, the world is rough. Inside the skin, arrangement holds, for now. Oil has its own grammar. It refuses urgency, prefers sentences built by the fingertip, clause by clause, until shine becomes structure. The jar opens with a soft thock, ere meeting the weight of last season's sesame pressed with a neighbor's patient stone. One drop, then two, never three. Excess turns virtue to gossip. Palms rub until warmth persuades viscosity into obedience, and the first touch goes to the crown, where sleep left a small republic of defiance. Hair listens slowly. It does not surrender so much as it is convinced. The comb begins where fingers have argued a path. Wide teeth go in first, like oxen learning a field after winter, patient, unromantic, certain. Each snag is memorized and then forgotten on purpose. The comb does not humiliate, it translates. From nape to ear, from ear to temple, from crown to the slow river of the back, order is coaxed into being. The fine teeth wait until the wide have finished their diplomacy, then follow to write law where custom has already taken root. At the comb's heel, a glaze of oil says enough. The rag at the tray's edge drinks what the morning no longer needs. There are powders for the hair as well as the face. Rice, pounded and sieved, sits in a shallow dish beside a pinch of ground orris. Nothing loud, a botanical whisper. A dusting along the scalp keeps the day from learning too much about the body's weather. The puff taps, turns, taps again, like a sparrow exploring crumb. The bronze mirror returns a matte calm at the parting. Later, when the alley warms and the shopkeeper's questions grow sticky, this small cloud will have been the difference between composure and repair. The mirror also notes the brows. A brush, fox hair, lean as a sentence that knows what it must say, touches a cake of soot made from the lamp's best evenings. The arches are not carved but persuaded, thick left intentional at their beginnings where certainty lives, thin slightly where surprise should be allowed to appear. The balance is less fashion than survival. A face that startles no one survives more easily. A painted box yields lip color in 3 tones, safflower's brief sunrise, cinnabar's formal warning, and a paste of mulberry that pretends to be modest until it meets skin. Mornings without audience choose safflower diluted on the fingertip with a breath's worth of water. It looks like health remembered. Grandmother's thumbprint lives on the underside of the lid, a fossil of a day when she chose cinnabar and said nothing to anyone about why. Garments wait folded like paragraphs that can be read many ways. Cotton under linen, washed last night, stiffened in the courtyard wind, admits the skin with a sigh that suggests the rightness of clean. Threads show where mending has been honest. A tiny ladder at the shoulder, a careful graft at the side seam, evidence that hands do not wait for prosperity to respect fabric. Over this, a middle robe, soft laid weave, pale blue sanded by years to the tone of river at dusk. The outside layer depends on itinerary. For the market, something that knows how to be brushed by baskets and not complain. For a visit, a silk that learns the house it enters and speaks low in corners. Colors are not random. They negotiate with the calendar. A green that leans toward reed if letters might arrive. A clay that forgives dust if errands will multiply. A cloud grey for petition days when one must be serious without daring solemnity. Motifs hide at the edges. A meander at the cuff that promises never to wander. A row of tiny clouds that refuse to rain. The faint suggestion of bamboo shoots at the hem. Not enough to boast, only to reassure the ankle that growth is possible. The sash is an education repeated every day. It begins long and undecided. The first rap measures breath. The second trains the spine to carry sentences without complaint. The third secures the day to the body. Knots have dialects. The shop knot is quick to undo and respectful of returns. The visitor's knot holds reluctantly as if complimenting the host. The working knot favors the left, so the right hand is free to choose and to pay. Fingers remember what tongues are not allowed to say. Hair becomes architecture in earnest. The part is straightened with the hornpick's careful edge. Side sections are twisted into low loops that know how to bear the weight of themselves. The central length is flattened with a palm. fed back over a hidden cord, and turned into a core that will accept pins without asking questions. Oil is pressed into flyaways, not to erase them but to recruit them to citizenship. The first pin slides in bone quiet. The second, lacquered and plain, lives only to assist. The decorative pin waits, shell, carved with a cloud that has made its peace with staying put. It does not shout, it concludes. There are seasonable addenda. In winter, a felt cap lined with rabbit participates in dignity by not being beautiful. In summer, a thin gauze veil at the back of the neck guards against the kind of sun that argues rather than illuminates. Spring wants a sprig tucked near the ear, a sliver of peach blossom if the tree was generous, or else the idea of a sprig, embroidered on a ribbon no one will mention but everyone will notice. Autumn disdains additions. It prefers that the wrist show a little bone and the palate remember harvest. The face is revisited, not from vanity but from logistics. Powder gathers at corners when speech becomes an errand. A damp cloth smooths these corners into cooperation. A dot of alum touches a heel where a sandal promises betrayal later. A flicker of sandalwood rides the inside of the cuff, a private treaty with the afternoon. These are not adornments so much as reinforcements. Beauty here is a defensive craft. Jewelry is argument and arithmetic. One piece says I know my place. Two pieces say I choose it. A simple bead bracelet, glass that learned humility, accepts the wrist. Ears are left undecided. Today's path includes ducks, dogs, and men who misunderstand permission. Necklines advise the same. The underlinen shows a thumb's breadth, suggesting tidiness rather than invitation. In the basket, a small silk square wraps the powder twist and a spare pin. If a day unravels, one corner of silk and a new angle can give it a second chance. The house contributes. An aunt with eyes like patient knives inspects the back seam and finds it acceptable but not praiseworthy. She says the word hum in 3 syllables that each mean yes, but differently. A cousin, hair still in sleep's argument, imitates the comb's motion in the air and is forgiven for the theft. From the stove, Kanji decides to be ready. The bowl warms hands that will soon be required to be deft. A strip of pickled radish offers the mouth a reason to stay interested in the day. Shoes remember roads. The left sandal bears a scar from a summer nail. The right has learned to lean at the moment a cart's shadow confuses dogs. Straps are checked, not for beauty but for honesty. A dab of oil on the strap buckle keeps squeak from making opinions of its own on crowded streets. There is the question of sleeves. Long enough to be graceful, short enough to avoid soup. A folded cuff, stitched prudently, suggests a readiness to lift, to carry, to sign. At the wrist, the powder's soft grit tells the mind that slip is unlikely. The hand believes it and moves accordingly. The sleeve's inner edge whispers to the palm with every reach. Hold yourself in. In the bronze mirror's shallower light, the face learns its final version for the morning. Lips, nearly dry now, are pressed once against the heel of the hand. The hand comes away with a faint pedal that would embarrass no one if discovered. Brows remember their restraint. Hair holds its republic. The sash waits for the smallest tightening that denial will claim it never received. Before the door, there is a ritual of inventory performed without naming. Oil sheen, present but not persuasive. Powders field, calm and unprovoked. Garments fall, sympathetic to knees. Knots loyalty, tested by turning twice and bowing once. Shoes temper, silent. In this house, beauty has always been a way to avoid being corrected by strangers. It is armor disguised as courtesy. A foot crosses the lintel and comps the world. Sun, wind, dust, opinion. The market begins to speak in onions and iron. Children drag sticks along walls, writing a literature of scratches. A neighbor's rooster practices leadership. In this noise, small perfections must negotiate their survival. Oil will meet wind, powder will meet sweat, silk will shake hands with wood, comb logic will argue with afternoon chaos. The day will win sometimes. Repair will win the rest. By the gate, a woman returning from the well nods at the arrangement without staring. It is praise that leaves no residue. Down the lane, the clerk from Chapter 1 might pass with ink on his cuff and a rumour of pine around him. The world will not unite them. but their crafts rhyme. He taught bamboo to remember, she teaches hair to hold. He made the morning legible, she makes it bearable. Between them runs a thoroughfare of maintenance. At the corner, the sun lifts an eyebrow at the sash knot and approves. The face learns how to be neutral in a way that reads as kind. The body steps into the sentence of the street and begins to conjugate its verbs. To buy, to carry, to return, to be overlooked. What the comb knows travels under the pin. What the sleeve hides breathes against the wrist. If daily life is surprisingly miserable, the surprise fades. The misery learns to mind its manners when hair is orderly, powder is calm, and the garment reads as a complete thought. By mid-morning, the courtyard has become a quiet stage for small obediences. The basin's rim is cool, the eaves give disciplined shade. Even the sparrows seem to observe lei, propriety, in their hopping arcs along the wall. Beauty here is not conquest but compliance, a choreography of modest means arranged to look inevitable. It must endure dust, gossip, and the calendar, and do so without asking for applause. Oil first, always, moistened fingers reading the scalp like a clerk reads bamboo, line by line until resistance lifts. The jar keeps secrets, sesame pressed last Chongyang, infused with a thumb of chenpi dried under winter window, a few bruised osmanthus blossoms from mid-autumn folded in when certainty felt scarce. It is a lineage held and sent. 1 drop tells last year's weather. 2 drops recall a harvest that barely qualified as one. A 3rd drop would be luxury, and luxury is suspicious. The comb understands the classic of rights better than most people. Wide teeth argue for order. Fine teeth codify it. At the nape, hair behaves like the yellow river in flood, broad, ambitious, easily offended. At the crown, it remembers the mandate, smooth, high, made to carry a pin as if it were a seal. When a snag comes, the comb pauses, backs up, and approaches again at a more reasonable angle. Ren, humanus, applies even to knots. Powder sits like captured moonlight in a shallow dish. Rice ground under a stone that remembers an aunt's hands, sifted through silk carefully dammed at both corners, then scented with the faintest of baiha. It is not mask but mediation. A light veil along the brow where thoughts gather, a softer pass along the nose where markets make claims, a whisper under the jaw where restraint pretends it was born. The bronze mirror returns a face that has chosen ping, levelness, overshine. Brows are not drawn, they are reminded. Lampblack from last night's wick meets a foxhair brush that knows the difference between intention and doctrine. Arches keep their thickness where courage begins and thin only where surprise is permitted to live. A court scholar might praise the balance. An alley vendor will not notice. Both outcomes are correct. The wardrobe explains its Confucianism without quoting it. Inner linen, clean even when poor. Middle robe, a study in moderation, indigo diluted to the color of river clay after rain. Outer layer, chosen by function, not fantasy. If an errand requires the register hall, the cuff calls for plainness that reads as respect. If only cabbage and vinegar stand between the house and hunger, the hem must forgive splashes. The sash speaks dialects of knot, the market knot that unfastens with a single tug, the visiting knot that holds like a promise and yields like one too, the writing day knot that steadies breath across the ribs so the back forgets to complain. Motifs keep to the margins. A border of lei when meanders around a cuff without losing itself. At the hem, 3 shoots of bamboo, sanji, suggest integrity that bends but does not break. A cloud band travels the collarbone and never rains. Nothing is loud. Something is always clear. Hair becomes architecture with regional accents. A low knot in the Chu style leans toward poetry and sleeves. A higher coil remembers court corridors and the possibility of officials. Most days choose the middle, a coiled chignon anchored by bone, lacquer, and 3 strands of patience. Oil smooths flyaways the way a magistrate smooths a case, without erasing the truth, only making it presentable. The first pin is duty, the second habit, the third permission to be seen. Fragrance is argument disguised as air. Camellia oil carries garden stoicism, clove carries news. Sandalwood speaks to the self listening inside the self. A mote of musk tucked into a sachet sewn with 10 careful knots, each knot a small treaty with anxiety, hangs at the sash. It will be accused of superstition by anyone who has never been pushed in a crowd. There are seasonal footnotes. In spring, a faint smear of plum paste at the lip corners suggests hope without promising it. Summer asks rice powder at the hairline to hold off heat until shade remembers its job. Autumn chooses colors that borrow from millet and persimmon, the kind of tones that look good even when tired. Winter accepts felt and rabbit lining with the dignity of someone who has finally admitted the North is not a rumor. Etiquette writes itself into fabric. Sleeves long enough to say patience, short enough to keep soup where soup belongs. The inner cuff holds a chalk of alum for sandals and an edge of silk for breath. The outer cuff keeps its silence even when bumped by carts. The collar leaves a thumb's worth of linen visible, suggesting tidiness rather than invitation. Jewelry, if any, is arithmetic. 1 piece equals place, 2 equals choice, 3 equals commentary, which is rarely affordable. Miseries creep in at the seams. Oil is rationed more carefully than opinions. Powder cakes if the well is late. A hairline crack in the bronze mirror cuts through the left eye and lends everyone a borrowed severity. Garments remember the tax of a previous winter. The sash's edge has been turned twice to hide a fray and will be turned a third time when harvest shrinks again. Even the comb has lost a tooth to a morning when patience cost more than wood. And yet the ritual proceeds because the day does. Outside, the lane rehearses its chorus: soy, brine, iron, steam, mule, child. Inside, small perfections bargain with large indifference. A fingertip checks the knot, as if asking, "Are we agreed?" A palm presses oil's last glimmer at the crown. Not vanity, insurance. The bronze mirror gives back a person prepared to be ignored safely. There is an old saying pinned in a mother's voice: first dress the face the house can afford, then the conduct the neighbors can bear. It means powder is cheaper than apologies. It also means sleeves can hold a life together when words cannot. The gate lifts. A sandal finds dust that knows its name. Somewhere, the clerk from the first chapter ties a bundle with 3 neat knots, while here a woman ties one and leaves the end tucked where only she can find it blind. 2 crafts, 1 country, both practicing shu, reciprocity, with a world that is not trying to be kind. By the time the sun clears the roof tiles, the arrangement has become a kind of oath. If the day insists on being miserable, it will at least have to work for it. The hair will hold, the powder will negotiate, the garment will read as a complete thought. And when the thought frays by afternoon, there will be a comb in the basket, a twist of rice moonlight, and a knot that remembers how to let go and begin again. By noon, the courtyard light is a flatter kind of honesty. Shadows withdraw to the edges like polite elders at a banquet, and the tiled roof releases heat in little sighs. The arrangement made at dawn now meets the day's second exam: movement. What held on the stool must hold while crossing a street with opinions, while bargaining over greens, while declining the neighbor's news without appearing to judge it. Beauty, in this house, is not a spectacle. It is a method of travel. The hair is first to be tested. A breeze off the alley tries to teach it disorder, and the chignon replies in the tone of the Book of Odes, firm without raising its voice. Oil remembers what combs forget. A fingertip at the nape reseats a loop. A pin is nudged half a grain deeper, bone finding bone with the quiet click a scribe hears when bamboo aligns. Even the mischief at the hairline meets its measure. 1 breath across the crown, palm smooth from brow to knot, and the flyaways accept citizenship. In a better district, this would be vanity. Here it is logistics. At the market, the air rehearses its commonplaces. Soy sauce mutters in its amphora. Brine speaks in numbers. Ginger sits like punctuation. A fish proclaims itself beyond rhetoric. Sleeves perform their courtesy. They skim the damp plank where greens wait. They fold back at a stall's invitation like a bow that requires no words. They absorb a dot of radish water and do not publish it. Cuffs carry their own etiquette. The lay-when border keeps its path even when a hand extends farther than thrift recommends. A seller notices not color but conduct. Your sash knows knots, he says, which is how praise sounds when coins are near. Scent navigates bodies. Camellia oil holds close, private orthodoxy. Sandalwood waits in the fold of the left cuff like a proverb. A sachet of musk stitched with 10-knot protection. Shi Jian hangs light at the sash, invisible until the crowd presses and the amulet's logic seems less superstitious than civic. A girl with a basket of scallions passes and inhales without turning. That is triumph enough. In a city where miseries arrive as weather, to take up no extra room in the nose is almost a political kindness. Powder shows its compromise. Under the sun it prefers neutrality. Neither shine nor chalk, only the legal pail of rice. A cloth square, silk at the edge, cotton at the core, touches the fold beside the nose and leaves with what the hour no longer needs. The bronze mirror, carried in a sleeve like a second thought, reflects a face softened by errands. A faint crack across its left gives the eye a tiny, inherited gravitas. Ancestors are always editing. Garments render their verdict. The inner linen is doing the work of two. The middle robe remembers the bruise of a basket's rim and forgives it. At the hem, 3 bamboo shoots stitched in pale thread, Sanji, keep their parable, bend, do not break. The outer layer negotiates benches, thresholds, and a stray dog's enthusiasm for cloth. Colour stays within its agreed language. River indigo for patience, militoka for hunger managed, cloud grey for bureaucracies. Pattern remains a rumour, a cloud band around the collar refusing to rain, a meander that never gets lost even when the alley insists. A pause by the well becomes a small repair hall. Hairpin 3 comes out, dusts itself on a folded sleeve, and returns at a new angle, slightly higher, like a magistrate promoted by one stool. The knot is tightened with 2 fingers and a promise. Powder is tapped from a paper twist into the puff's memory. The jawline receives its treaty with glare. Lips get a second whisper of safflower, diluted with the well's cold. The sun blinks. The mirror agrees for one more street. There are rules no one writes. When speaking to elders, let the sleeve cover the wrist. Virtue reads better in long lines. When crossing the yamen threshold, let colour step back and stitching step forward. Officials recall neatness longer than beauty. When passing cartwheels, tilt the body, not the hem. Cloth that asks the world to move learns disappointment. When the beggar reaches, give with the left so the right can hold the basket steady. Rice costs less than apologies. Even misfortune observes ritual. A bead breaks from a plain bracelet and clicks once on stone, announcing it has resigned. The bead is retrieved, the thread licked and threaded through like a sentence restored by context, the knot made double and set to dry against the warmth hidden in a sleeve. No one claps. A small thing remembered itself. That is what survival often looks like. At home, the house receives the hours as if they were deliveries. Shoes leave dust that becomes an entry in the floor's ledger. The sash loosens one thought at a time. The mirror returns to its stand with the dignity of a retired official. Tools attended before the body, comb washed and dried tooth down by the window square of afternoon, pins laid on cloth so lacquer will not learn impatience, the powder dish wiped along its rim where the day tried to become sediment. Even oil gets a courtesy, a fingertip across the jar lip to keep its story from spilling. A basin steams on the stool. The face meets water in increments, brow first to surrender thought, temples to release listening, mouth to rinse the market's arithmetic. Powder dissolves like a date in tea. Underneath, skin reappears as a fact rather than a project. The cloth's final pass is a benediction written in cotton. Hair is reread. The chignon is loosened like a knot forgiven, strands combed until the scalp makes it small weather, cool breeze, soft rain. Oil is argued back in with thrift. Even Camellia knows the price of transport. The last pass of the comb is not for appearance. It is for sleep later, which begins at noon and waits politely. Garments become text again. The outer robe bears across a bamboo pole that has carried so many evenings it could testify. The middle robe is brushed at the hem where the market wrote its unsolicited footnotes. The inner linen earns another half day, which is what days do here, halve themselves into enough. The sash is coiled and set in the bowl where the family's knots learn from one another without quarrelling. There are lines from the Analects that do not require quoting. Rectify the names. Call the rag a tool and the tool a guest. Cultivate the self in the household. let the collar be clean before the petition is pure. Governed by virtue, let scent convince before words are asked to work. When beauty functions like this, quiet, iterated, reluctant to be seen, it moves from decoration to infrastructure. It keeps alive from fraying where the world insists it must. Outside, the afternoon thickens into chores. Inside, the house arranges a second beginning, a braid for later, a sachet turned and padded so its musk remembers, a paper twist refilled with rice moonlight, a pin laid across the tray like a bridge. If daily life in Han China is surprisingly miserable, surprise is gradually trained out of it. Misery stays, but it learns table manners. A knot that holds, a sleeve that behaves, a scent that minds its radius. These are not victories. They are continuations. By the time the bell notices evening, the face has returned to itself twice and will do so again before lamp trimming. The mirror dims, the comb dries, the oil forgets a little of its own story until tomorrow's finger reminds it. Threads have survived the afternoon. That is the kind of success the household believes in, the kind that no one would pay to watch, and that everyone would miss if it failed. By the time the oil's breath thins and the comb's last tooth has counted your scalp, the house is already rehearsing tomorrow. Cloth has been persuaded, powder has negotiated, and the lamp's circle of light has remembered its proper size. Night in Han China is a ledger of small mercies, quiet slaves, obedient knots, a bowl that cools without complaint. But dawn is less sentimental. At first bell, the household's grammar, oil, powder, cloth, steps aside for another language entirely, numbers. Chapter 2 taught the body how to behave. Chapter 3 teaches the grain how to answer. Today is a tax day, and the state, which prefers order to poetry, will take its measure. They say propriety, begins at the gate. The clerk says it begins at the scale. These are not necessarily arguments. Both mean the same thing. When names are correct, the measures will follow. Confucius would have called it rectifying names, Zheng Ming, making words and weights match, restoring the seam between what you call a thing and what it weighs in the world. A family that folded last night's robe carefully has a better chance of folding today's tally into something survivable. The courtyard wakes with the timbre of bushels, not birds. A flat-bottomed basket scrapes the ramp. A shoulder pole answers with a dull, bone-coloured ache. Grain is heavier in the morning, the dew, the night air, so the prudent rise early to make its burden speak before the sun burns the truth away. The eldest son rehearses the figures under his breath. The younger thinks of turnings, not numbers. One bundle to the granary, one to the loan, one to the belly, one to the rats. Heaven loves balance, the classics say, but rats prefer surplus. It is a mismatch the Yarman clerk will not consider sacred. The government's appetite arrives as ritual. First, the inspector of measures. With bamboo rods he will insist are straight because the empire says they are. Then, the beam scale, a lacquered arm that pretends to be a branch, bearing fruit of weight. Then, the hollowed standard bushel, its rim as hard as a magistrate's smile. A boy keeps a gourd of water to settle the dust. An old man keeps a piece of string to remind the scale of its center. Somewhere in the Book of Odes there is a harvest that sings. Here there is a harvest that explains itself. Grain is poured not like a gift, but like a confession. Clean, level, unargumentative. The good households learned, years ago, that grain speaks best when combed like hair. A flat stick, edge-worn soft as an aunt's voice, draws across the bushel to shave it level. This is the difference between a neighbor and a penalty. The clerk watches the stick more than the grain. He knows the trick where the wrist lifts just enough to build a little hill at the center. He knows the trick where the stick is thicker at one end, by accident. He knows these tricks because his uncle taught him when he still wore a braid. Thrift is a private family ethics. The state's ethics have witnesses. Measurements in Han life are a kind of cosmology in wood and cord. A kai of bamboo marked in black ink, a dow of grain with a rim that remembers more than it admits, a scale pan that decides like winter. The empire raises these things to the level of principle. A straight rod is a virtue. A true bushel is benevolence, ren, not because it is kind to you, but because it treats every household equally cold. Wren can feel that way from the wrong side of a ledger. The numbers themselves are intimate. They enter the household through the door like old relatives. They sit, they look, they ask how the marriage is holding. They point out that the west wall needs repair. A family keeps two tallies, the one it tells the clerk and the one it tells its ancestors. They do not match, but they bow to each other in passing. To keep face, the father will hand over a little more than last season. To keep children, he will keep a little back. Do not bleed the seed, the grandmother says, and every jar in the storehouse nods. Storage is not a room. It is a temperament. The bins, earthen, cool, a little damp at the corners, are only as good as the patience that filled them. Last autumn's sorghum sleeps under a crust of straw that remembers its summer name. The millet catches the light and pretends to be gold. The rice sulks in its jar, knowing its worth. The mother runs her hand through the grain the way she once ran her hand through a baby's hair, testing for stones, husks, trouble. She finds a pebble. Pebbles have their own arithmetic. 1 pebble in a bushel is a mistake, 3 is a fine. A handful is an argument you will not win. Measure inside before they measure outside, the uncle says, and the house does. A family scale, humbler than the state's, hangs from a wall hook. Its beam remembers last year's debt. Its cord has been retied so often it can recite the rights. A series of pebbles, each polished by fingers into small patriarchs, serve as weights. Are they honest pebbles? To the house, yes. To the empire, insufficiently terrestrial. The son smiles at his own joke and gets a look from his mother that contains 3 seasons of advice. Here is the thing about grain. It is a calendar with calories. You store not to survive winter, but to remember spring. The best households keep 2 songs in their jars, 1 for eating, 1 for planting. The tax wants both and will call it order. This is why last night's folding of the sash mattered. The habit of leaving something for tomorrow is a defense against the day that asks for everything. At the yamen, a word that tastes of old bamboo and cold ink, the clerk greets your grain the way a physician greets a pulse. He does not ask if you slept well. He asks if the Tao is true. The beam is lifted. The pebbles are placed. The hush that follows is a philosophy. Shu, reciprocity, says, do not ask of others what you would hate. The clerk will say reciprocity is what the standard bushel offers. The farmer will say reciprocity is what heaven offers the stubborn. The scale does not take sides. It has only gravity for counsel. Once, when the father was young and the empire's hand less careful, there were 2 measures, the one for buying and the one for selling. The difference was called clever. Then a magistrate who had read the classics too closely declared that cleverness without virtue is theft. He burned a card of warped yardsticks in front of the market arch. The smoke smelled like corrections. Ever since, the straight rod has been a sermon no one argues with loudly. They argue with sand at the bottom of the bushel, or with a breath held just long enough to keep a heap from collapsing. Some ethics are granular. Payment is itself a choreography. The sacks are lifted with the quiet heroism of the back. The tally stick gets its notch, a small wound on a long bone. Paper will someday make this elegant. For now, wood suffers on behalf of truth. A copy of the notch stays at the yamen. Another goes home tied with a strip of cloth that used to be part of a girl's sleeve. Nothing in the house is only one thing. Even the penalty is a bookmark. Who is the tax for? The child asks, because children will ask where adults redact. Roads, says the mother, because the mother believes in naming things that carry you. Soldiers, says the uncle, because the uncle has seen border dust. Granaries, says the grandmother, because the grandmother knows famine has a long memory. Books, says the father, and everyone laughs, because books belong to people whose hands do not smell of millet. But he says it anyway. In the Analects, there is a line about governing by virtue so that people will be ashamed to do wrong. The father cannot govern, but he can be ashamed of a handful of pebbles that were too ambitious. He tosses 2 back into the yard. When the sacks have been lightened and the ledger has acquired its notch, the day begins to belong to the house again. The store jars stand like small, patient kings on their packed earth dais. The best jar, its lip repaired with a ribbon of tin, gets an offering of quiet, a triple hand smoothing across the top layer, a palm's promise not to disturb the seed portion no matter how sharp the night's hunger becomes. This is not poetry, this is policy. Before closing the door, the mother takes a pinch of ash and circles it along the threshold, an old habit from before the empire learned to count this well. Ash remembers spills. Ash remembers mice. It is not a barrier. It is a ledger even the wind can read. The sun hangs the family scale back on its hook. The cord twitches once, twice, as if nodding to the beam's fatigue. In another house, a clerk is explaining that fairness feels heavier up close. In this house, the millet stops pretending to be gold and agrees to be supper. At dusk, the language of numbers thins and the grammar of care returns. Oil remembers. Powder mediates. Cloth forgives. But a tax day leaves a taste under the tongue that the willow twig cannot sweeten. The knowledge that prosperity is not how much grain you have, but how much grain you can watch leave without breaking your own names. Tomorrow there will be fields again, and the small arguments of weather and weeds. Tonight, the lamp circle has one lesson left. It is small, and it is sufficient. Keep the wick scented. Keep the measure true. Keep a handful of seed that belongs to spring and to no one else. This, the elders say, is leave for hungry months. Propriety that is not ceremony but survival. Heaven will not count your bushels. The yarman already did. Heaven will count how carefully you put away the comb. After the clerk's cord has gone still and the tally stick's new notch cools into the wood, the house takes a breath shaped like relief and arithmetic. Tax days always leave a small echo in the ribs. The figures have marched through, the sacks are lighter, and now a quieter duty returns, to store what remains so that hunger cannot red our door. If part one was the beam and bushel, this is the jar and the hand. It is less public, more intimate, less law, more lay, propriety at the level of corners. Storage in a hand courtyard is not only bins and lids, it is a way of seeing the year. The good houses do not think of grain as a pile but as a calendar that can be touched. Each jar has a season in its belly. The tall earthen one by the north wall keeps winter like a low fire. The squat jar near the stove keeps early autumn, still a little boastful. A cracked lip repaired with tin remembers a bad year and makes every scoop more careful. Propriety is also memory. We begin by sweeping the storage room as if making a bed for an impatient guest. The packed earth floor gets a damp cloth dragged across it. Twice. The first pass gathers the dust that pretends to be harmless. The second teaches it not to return. A boy follows with a small brazier of mugwort. The smoke coils like a thin teacher, pointing at spider corners, mouse holes, gaps where last spring's advice leaked out. Ash is a ledger the wind can't smudge, grandmother says, pinching a grey line along the threshold the way a clerk draws a boundary on a page. It is not magic. It is a signal. We are watching. Jars are not mouths, they are lungs. We air them. Lids lifted, interiors greeting the day's mildness, the faint chalk smell of fired clay stepping out after a long sentence. A cloth, not too wet, wipes the rim until it squeaks, a clear sound that means the lip won't betray what the belly guards. Inside, a pinch of dried pepper at the bottom is not seasoning. It is a rumour that mice hate. A twist of paper, burned and swirled, leaves temper in the jar's throat. The mother raps the side with her knuckle, listening for the tone that says sound, not the sulky thud that says damp. Grain must be cooled before it is stored. Even after the sun leaves it alone, it keeps a private warmth, the last argument of summer. Spread on mats, it exhales tiny ghosts of steam, and we fan it with palm leaves like we would a sick child, steadily, without drama. Rice is worse than millet for this. It hoards warmth and then resents it. Millet is a little philosopher, small, dry, resigned to be useful. Sorghum is a gossip. It rattles even when it is quiet. Each demands a different hand, and the house accommodates, because reciprocity, is not only for people. We do not pour directly from the basket to the jar. First, a sieve teaches humility. A flat tray with a tight weave is tilted and tapped. Stones swear they are grain until they betray their weight and slide the wrong way. 2 pebbles escape. A child sharp eye sentences them to the yard. Justice, the uncle says, and everyone pretends the joke is fresh. Then the mother's hands go through the grain as if combing, because last night taught us that combs are for more than hair. Fingers learn to find what eyes missed. This is not worry, it is governance. Order matters. Old over new, never the other way. The base layer belongs to last season, leveled and padded like a promise. Today's grain sits on top like a well-behaved guest, not a conquering uncle. A leaf of bamboo, dried and softened, lays between layers, a thin treaty that future hands will understand. The father cannot quote the classics without coughing, but he knows the line, rectifying names. He calls the bottom seed, the middle supper, the top tax's remainder. To name is to keep the hand from forgetting itself. Lids are a philosophy masquerading as circles. A good lid is not merely wide, it is decisive. Clay on clay, with a ring of cloth tucked like a secret between. This is the difference between a month and a mistake. Around each lid, we tie a cord in a sleeping knot, not a market knot. Market knots are quick and boastful. Sleeping knots are patient and unwilling to wake without permission. The cord's tail is tucked under itself toward the wall, the way elders sit with their hands hidden in sleeves when they do not intend to move again soon. The inventory lives in 3 places: on a slat of wood by the door with notches that a clerk would approve, in the mother's head with notches a clerk cannot see, and in the caution each person brings to the ladle. Paper is a luxury. We etch the month's ledger with a nail, gentle strokes that do not raise splinters. Notch tallies count jars, dot tallies count scoops. The son tries to improve the system by carving a new symbol. The grandmother smiles, then adds a dot next to it. Survival has a way of simplifying alphabets. We set watches the way generals do, with fewer flags and more ears. A cat gets promoted to the night shift. Its wages are praise and permission to be arrogant. Traps are baited with sorghum no one will miss. Ash circles tell where the whiskers trespassed. We place a shallow bowl of water by the most tempting jar. Mice betray themselves to thirst. If the water shivers at midnight when no one is walking, we examine the wall at dawn. The wall answers questions a mouse never will. Seasonal rules hang like quiet laws over the room. In plum rains, we open late and close early. The air cannot be trusted to be a friend twice in the same hour. In high autumn, when the air is honest, we lift lids a little longer so the jars can remember what outside feels like. Jars get lonely. Lonely jars sweat. In deep winter, breath is rationed and so is impatience. We avoid laughter in the storeroom in winter. It feels expensive. When we take grain out, we do it with a shallow scoop, not a deep plunge. Deep plunges invite trouble. The hand forgets its boundaries and the jar forgets its dignity. Level, do not heap. If someone is tempted to be generous to today, we remind them that spring is a person whose name we already promised to protect. This is Ren, humanus, not the heart that gives now, but the heart that keeps later from starving. Even the door participates. Hinges are greased with sesame scraps. The room should sigh, not cry. A broom is laid against the jamb with its straw ends facing inward. An old habit that says, we sweep toward us, not away from us, meaning, we gather and keep. Above the lintel, a small slip of wood bears a saying from no book, seed first. It is ugly calligraphy. It is perfect governance. By dusk, the storeroom has become a low, patient drum. You can hear the house's fortune if you rest your ear against a jar. The notes are modest, but they are there. We close the lids and tie the sleeping knots as if tucking in stubborn children. Outside, the sky folds itself along old creases. Inside, the grain lies level, which is another way of saying the heart does. Later, when the lamp is trimmed and the comb has counted the day back into order, a taste remains under the tongue, ash, clay, a whisper of pepper. Part 1 taught us to stand straight in front of the state scale. Part 2 teaches us to bend wisely before our own jars. The officials have gone. Heaven has not arrived. What we have, between those two distances, is storage made of lee and habit, a measured room, a handful of laws, and a sleeping knot that will wake only when spring gives the order. All afternoon the house spoke in numbers, bushels levelled, jars tied with sleeping knots, a ledger carved into wood that even dusk could understand. By evening, the arithmetic loosens its grip, the storeroom sighs back into earth, ash lines rest like thin grey eyelids over the threshold. Oil remembers, powder mediates, cloth forgives, and the night asks for a different measure, not of grain, but of breath. Chapter 3 taught the hands to level. Chapter 4 asks the hands to listen. Where the Yaman's beam demanded proof, the kin's lacquered body will accept only patience. They say Li, propriety, begins at the gate, but for music, it begins at the stool, the small, honest seat set at a height that doesn't flatter the knees. The table is a little higher than supper, a little lower than judgment. On it lies the kin, 7 strings patient as old friends, lacquer black that has remembered the habits of light for decades. Its shape is a compromise between sky and board, rounded above, flat below, like someone who has learned how to meet heaven halfway and the ground fully. Before a single note agrees to be born, spacing is negotiated. Not the kind from markets, one elbow between strangers, but the kind that keeps sound from bumping into itself. North wall a pace and a half away so the note can turn and look back. Window lattices ajar, not open, so the evening's mildness can carry but not steal. The stool is set a kai back from the table's lip. The left foot finds the mat seam. The right breath sits 1 syllable lower. Even silence has to fit. Tuning in this house is not a display. It is an apology offered to each string for what the day asked of the hands. The first harmonics are found at the chihui, 7th marker, where the air is already prepared to agree. The thumb pads the silk. The overtones arrive like ghosts with good manners, present, but only as long as decorum allows. The left hand learns again the old grammar. Press without scolding, slide without gossip, release without sighing too loudly. Kin timbre is a moderation dressed as a colour. It refuses both the brag of brightness and the sulk of mud. If a bell is a straight road, the kin is a footpath that remembers each person who used it. A first phrase is not a sentence, it is a bow. The pluck is small, like tasting tea before the cup remembers heat. The room adjusts its shoulders. The jar by the wall, which kept winter this morning, now keeps a fragment of sound. The bamboo pole by the door chooses not to creak. The cat, paid in arrogance, accepts a demotion to listener. Ensemble spacing in hand life is the same politics that kept elbows honest at tax lines, now translated into breath. The shao, a bamboo vertical flute, stands 2 paces to the kin's right, because bamboo prefers the downwind side. If the dizzy, the side-blown cousin with a flicker of silk at its membrane, joins, it will choose the left, where the wall teaches it restraint. A small drum waits far back, almost embarrassed to exist, for the moments when rhythm must be reminded, not enforced. No one sits opposite the kin. You don't stare into a well while you draw from it. The leader, if that word can survive this much softness, doesn't count off. Counting off would be an argument with the lamp. Instead, she inhales until the oil's flame stops listening to the draft. That is the downbeat. Confucius named 100 virtues. The kin remembers one of them as spacing. Leave room for the note to end with dignity. Leave room between phrases for the heart to translate. Timbre is not tone alone. It is the record of surfaces behaving. Silk against lacquer has its own ethics. Good silk doesn't pout. Bad silk glares. Tonight, the strings are agreeable, sticky enough to hold a slide, clean enough to let go without scandal. Pressed just behind the third hui, the sound brightens like a courtyard after sweeping. Pressed closer to the bridge, the note grows dry and factual, like a clerk's test voice. Over the 9th, the harmonic rings the way a clear bowl admits water, not loudly, but completely. Pieces are chosen by weather. After a day that demanded proof of weight, the house refuses anything that insists. No marches, no brave drumming, no crowded reeds. A melody that walks instead of argues. A motif that repeats the way the hands repeated the scoop. Level, never heaped. The kin says, "We will try this shape again, with a better exit." The shao replies with breath that already knows how to leave. Spacing between players is measured in courtesies. The kin ends a phrase with a left-hand lift that lingers 1 heart's width. The Shao enters on the second half of that width, as if stepping through a half-open door. They do not talk over each other. They finish each other's restraint. When someone is tempted to rush, the oil in the lamp makes it small, wet, correcting noise. The lamp understands tempo better than pride does. In this room, volume is a superstition. Loudness is believed to anger clay. The ear is the only drum anyone respects. The small frame drum gets a single fingertip, not a hand. It reminds the piece where earth is, only that. If the hall were large, if the magistrate cared for a show, there would be bronze and bravado. But daily life is a courtyard and a tired back. Music must fit where life fits. A child who survived the ledger's lecture stands at the door and counts without numbers. 1, and the echo of 1, 2, and the polite refusal to be a parade, 3, and a window lattice choosing to agree. He learns that rests are not holes, they are bowls. They hold what the note would have spilled. He learns that melody is a path that remembers each foot but favours none. The old say the kin can correct the heart without wounding it. That is not a medical claim. It is housekeeping. Today the house sold some of itself to order, bushels, cords, the public dignity of a level rim. Tonight, the house buys back a little quiet with sound that respects edges. The kin's timbre keeps the mouth closed but the mind lit. The Shao's breath teaches the jars how to exhale without losing face. Outside, neighbours keep their own ensembles of pots and gossip. Someone across the lane argues with a lute that is paid by volume. The wall refuses the contract. A moth decides that lacquer is a kind of night and fails to land. Ash on the threshold follows the vibrations to see if mice have learned music. Mice have not. Between pieces, the players retie how they sit. Knees remember their job is to be geography. Shoulders remember their job is to be weather. The kin gets a cloth laid on its bridge as if it were an elbow after work. The Shao gets its breath warmed again. Bamboo is a person who never stops wanting comfort. A kettle is set near, not on, the coals. Water that boils makes enemies. Tea will become the encore everyone knows how to perform. When the last piece ends, it does not finish. It arrives at a door it was already leaving. The final harmonic at the 7th marker rises like steam that doesn't need to be seen. No applause. This is not a market. A bow of the hand to the air. A nod that is half to heaven, half to lacquer. The cat, restored to arrogance, leaves without gratitude. The lamp trims itself. The room remembers itself. Tomorrow there will be roads and names and elbows and proof. Tonight, there is spacing, of bodies in a small room, of breath around notes, of silence around small courage. This is how Han knights take their medicine, without herbs, a kin that teaches the wrist to mean less and the heart to occupy its chair without borrowing the neighbour's. The grain will still be counted at dawn. For now, the ear measures enough. The kin has finished its first polite conversations with a room, silk negotiating with lacquer, harmonics bowing at the 7th marker like guests who know where to look. From outside, the courtyard almost seems mended. But music, even when it behaves, is a mirror that doesn't agree to flatter. It shows back the house, the day, the year. Tonight it shows how much effort it takes in Han life to make anything sound simple. Everyone loves to talk about the kin's virtue, its refined colour just shy of brightness, the way an overtone can be persuaded to stand on one foot and still look dignified. Fewer like to talk about the wrists. The wrists are where the price is paid. A good wrist in this house wakes before the rest of the arm, warms with a cloth, submits to a small circle traced 10 times in air because movement must be taught its borders before sound can be trusted to inhabit them. A bad wrist wants to show. It collapses, then begs style to rescue it. The old teacher never raises his voice, but tonight his instruction is a weather report delivered through posture. Lift here, soften there, don't sell the note short to pay a debt your pride made. The student nods, not because he agrees, but because in this house nodding is part of Lee, propriety that keeps the corner square when the roofs leak. It is easy to imagine the musician as a person of leisure, tea that remembers how to be green, a cloak that behaves like an answer, a small library full of bamboo that didn't mind becoming strips. But you can tell how untrue that is by looking at the hands. A farmer's hand tells you who he is before his mouth gets a chance. A musician's hand in this house looks like it might belong to someone more comfortable with ink, until the light catches the nail beds. The flesh just behind the nails is a biography no autobiography bothers to include. Roughness where silk bit back, a pale lattice where winter not only chapped but lectured, small, hard moons where the strings demanded proof. A kin is a daily discipline, not a seasonal one. Grain can be proud in autumn and forgiving in winter. Strings keep receipts. If you neglect them a day, they will return the favor. Silk goes sullen. Lacquer loses patience. It is the unromantic side of art. Powder on the bridge to absorb a humidity the lamp humors but can't undo. A cloth ribbon placed precisely so the left-hand slide won't turn a phrase into a squeak wearing a hat. The house knows these tactics the way it knows how to make stale millet agree to become supper. You cut the bad part off truth, then pretend it was born that way. People who write prefaces for other people's instruments like to claim that music lifts suffering above itself. The house knows better. It does not lift, it holds. A note is a bowl, not a ladder. The bowl is beautiful because it doesn't spill when the day jostles it. The student finishes a phrase as if closing a cabinet door against rats. The boy by the mat shifts and the floor answers in wood. The musician notices and changes nothing. Bureaucrats are paid to adjust the household. Musicians in this house are paid by the household to adjust themselves. Outside, a man with a 2-string spike fiddle knocks on the neighbor's gate. He will not be paid in coins. He will be paid in hot water and a few clean words. He draws a weeping, eager line out of a snakeskin belly and a bow that taught a horsehair to be somebody. He will play Love and Graves and the Wet Market without changing posture. Someone will say he is vulgar. Someone else will say he is honest. The wall doesn't make opinions. It makes margins. His tune arrives as complaints, softens into the courtyard, drags its feet a little at the threshold because Ash wrote the door's rules earlier. In here, the kin tries to make facts behave. Out there, the Erhu, call it Huchin if the neighbors are listening, reminds everyone that facts arrive already crying, and rhythm is something you summon when you don't want to drown. Silence is expensive, the old teacher says after the second piece fails to justify itself. He doesn't mean the cost of oil. He means the cost of making a house accept a note as a guest, not an intruder. In this lane, everyone bargains with noise. Chickens that believe dawn is a personality trait, clay jars that forget their lids exist, the cart whose left wheel is more committed to complaint than motion. Silence is not the absence of noise. It is a set of agreements enforced by habit. You have to earn the right to ask a child to stop stirring the water bucket. You have to earn the right to tell the cat to be a listener again. You have to earn the right to ask pain to write smaller. Musicians in Han life do not sit at the empire's center. They orbit it, sometimes close enough to feel the heat of a banquet, often far enough that their music cools into something people call taste. A chord invites a player the way a draft invites coughs. It is both flattery and hazard. One wrong flourish is called excess. One correct flourish is called invisible. Meanwhile, the granary clerk sleeps well because his notches have witnesses and his beam only answers to wait. The player's day, even when praised, ends with no proof that any of it mattered. A phrase evaporates correctly and no ledger grows kinder for it. The student takes up the shao, vertical flute of bamboo that believes in breath more than notes. Bamboo has opinions about mouths. It prefers the mouth that remembers fasts. He sets his jaw the way the book said, relaxed, which is a discipline no book can satisfy with diagrams. He plays a line that isn't an apology and isn't an announcement. The kin listens without listening. A good kin line notices the wind without becoming it. Breath warms the flute's column. Paint lifts from the rim onto his lip in the quietest of two, and the room calibrates around that small theft. There are rules in this house for how close breath can stand to silk. 2 paces if the air is wet, 1.5 with the window sleeping only one eye, 3 if the kettles are sulking because heat was rationed to the lamp. Spacing is not politeness. It is medicine dosed without boasting. A flute too close becomes vinegar. A flute too far becomes gossip outside the window. Tonight the kitchen air is honest. The clay has stopped pretending to be weather. and the breath can afford to be within an arm's yes. Leave room, the teacher says, not looking at either. He could be speaking to music. He could be speaking to the day. The phrase ends, and the kin takes the second half of the silence and shapes it like a sober art shapes a story. Ornaments withheld, invitation firm. When they try to meet in the middle, they do not shake hands. They nod, then both step back. In the margins of this quiet, a few other miserable truths do their chores. The player's mother has been nursing a tendon that refuses to honor arguments. The tendon last respected beans and heat applied with a pressed cloth, then resumed its skepticism when the sweeping resumed. The boy wants to practice after the lamp is tired. His father says no because oil is not a melody. The neighbor wants to listen from the eaves because he cannot afford to be seen wanting anything decorative. Desire for art is a luxury. The left sleeve hides it. When officials appear in stories, they love music as a virtue. In rooms like this, when officials appear in person, they love music as proof. Play me the one about cranes so I can tell the other man I recognized it before the third phrase. The player will oblige because there is nothing else to do, then spend a week apologizing to the instrument that it had to pose for someone else's reputation. There is a hierarchy even within quiet. The kin outranks the person who hears it badly. A child who cannot keep still has been made to count rests by tapping his own knee with 2 fingers. At first he calls them zeros, then doors. This door is for the flute to leave through. This door is for the kin to turn around in. This door is for my breath to sit without fidgeting. He learned something the adults forgot when they were learning to be tired. That music is not the sound, but the room the sound points to. He will forget this lesson when he is 12. He will remember it again when he is poor. The lamp lowers its voice unasked. Oil is almost a person in this house. It remembers praise longer than people do. The kin leans into a low register where timbre thickens to soup, not stew. It is a place where statements do not collapse, but they do consider not being statements. The left hand makes a slow, responsible slide up to the 5th hui, and the note clears its throat politely, admitting to more color than the room asked for. The teacher says nothing. The phrase says everything. You may have feelings if you can produce them without spilling. The ensemble, if this can be called one, adds a drum in name more than in sound. A thin frame, hide stretched just enough to give a syllable, not a sentence. A fingertip on the rim agrees with itself, and the next entrance arrives with a spine. The drum is not miserable. It is unnecessary, which in this lane is worse. Unnecessary things must be justified twice. The player justifies it by being so quiet the drum becomes a rumor of ground under the melody, not ground itself. The rumor is enough. In this city, ground is mostly a promise you share between friends. You can say a lot with the kin without being allowed to say it in words. A rising slide that doesn't reach the harmonic is a complaint that doesn't want to fight. A stopped tone that blooms at the tail is a gratitude that isn't flattery. A string buzz when the left hand is too near the bridge is a reminder that even careful people have elbows. But even the most articulate phrase cannot renegotiate the house's fact. There will be tax days, and even the jars that kept winter have small betrayals in their seams. Music does not cancel arithmetic. It puts polite cushions under it. The student's nail splits slightly at the corner, a small flag of white pain. He hides it in his sleeve the way he hides his disappointments in questions. After the piece, he will heat water, press the nail against a cloth, smooth it with a sliver of bone the way the aunt smooths threads for the loom, then grind a pinch of powder, oak gall or simple ash, and dab the edge so silk will not tug tomorrow. This is not romance. This is repair. Repair is the uncredited author of beauty in this house. Down the lane, another kind of ensemble is at work. A banquet with dust on its manners. A plucked lute with a metal taste, a reed that cannot forgive itself for being born, a set of clappers that sharpen conversation by threatening to be louder than it. Those players are not free either. They are tasked with producing joy on demand, a kind of labor more punishing than the field in summer because the sweat must be a secret. They will eat leftovers after the guests go home, then wash their faces with praise that smells like spilt wine. In this house, no such coins are minted. The praise has to be in the notes, and the notes have to be useful to the walls. Weather has been patient tonight, which is unusual. On nights when the sky is in the mood to be somebody, the kin's timbre goes to court and must wear shoes it does not like. Damp weather invites buzz. Dry air encourages brittleness. Wind asks the flute to perform hospitality it cannot afford. Tonight the air sits like an elder in a good chair and allows the young to practice without commentary. The house says thank you by not wasting it. In the middle of a piece that pretends not to be about grief, the bamboo flute breaks the temptation to be sweet and offers one note's width of roughness, just enough to remind the room that good taste is a danger when the heart is starving. The kin refuses to comfort it. Instead, it sets a stool for the roughness and asks it to sit without tracking mud onto the next phrase. Grief sits, wipes its feet, and waits. It is the most anyone here has ever asked grief to do, and perhaps the most grief will agree to without charge. There is a saying the teacher refuses to write down because paper feels official. Music is what a room does with an apology. Tonight the house has many. For debt, for impatience, for the corners we polished instead of the mouths we fed, for the way we looked at spring like a person we owed and then forgot to bow. The kin cannot alter these accounts, but it can file them neatly. Order is a comfort the poor seldom get to keep overnight. Order borrowed through sound is still order. In Han life, that is already a luxury. Later, tea is poured as if it were a coda that doesn't want applause. The kettle was wise enough not to boil. The water agrees to extract without making enemies of leaves. Cups clink at volumes the drum would respect. The players rinse their mouths with steam and swallow the day down to a size a lamp can supervise. The string with the split nail's memory will be loosened half a turn so sleep can find it without tripping. The flute will be laid horizontal, not vertical. Breath that worked should sleep lying down. Someone asks, too late to be corrected, whether it was worth it. The house answers with a small inventory. 2 phrases that did not lie, 3 silences that left room for the jars to feel important, a wrist that remembered dignity, a nail that will need care, a child who learned where doors belong in a song, a lamp that was allowed to be part of the ensemble instead of merely its hostage. Worth is a coin minted elsewhere. The house trades in usefulness. Tonight's usefulness is that everyone will sleep a little differently from how they woke, and no one will be able to explain why without sounding like a person who believes in poetry. When the room empties of sound, it does not become poor. It becomes a storehouse of a different mood, the way jars become sky when closed correctly. The ash at the threshold, smudged by vibrations, is repatted by the mother's thumb. She does not believe in omens. She believes in signs that can be swept. The cat resumes its divine rights and tests the kin's corner with a paw. The instrument forgives the poor because forgiveness is cheaper than new lacquer. The night will end, as good nights do, not with a lesson but with posture. The teacher will leave his back straight as he rises, to remind the boy that respect is a geometry, not a feeling. The boy will bow to the instrument before he bows to the teacher, which is correct and also a private argument he will lose when he marries. The lamp will be pinched with 2 fingers whose burns are old enough to have their own grandchildren. The house will darken, which is not the same as quieting. Quiet is a work that goes on without light. Somewhere on the road to the Yarman, a clerk whose ear is a drum only for footsteps will dream of very level bushels. In this courtyard, people will dream of water that never boils, of ash that writes wisdom on thresholds without leaving stains, of strings that forgive a day's impatience. Morning will not honor any of these dreams. It will shout in its old voice about elbows, measures, debts, roofs, rodents, and the way the sun likes to point out what we pretended not to see in the dark. But the house will have a small immunity, music remembered not as sound, but as spacing that can be applied to chores. Between 2 complaints, a breath. Between a demand and an answer, a silence measured in 1 lamp flicker. Between a hungry child and a thin bowl, a pause in which the hand that serves remembers to be level, not generous, because generosity in the wrong hour is cruelty with a smile. If it sounds bleak to call this comfort, that is because comfort in Han life does not wear silk unless the silk is doing labor. Comfort is a bowl that doesn't spill when someone bumps the table. Comfort is a knot that sleeps because it was tied correctly, not because it is too tired to fail. Comfort is a note that ends where it should and leaves the next note a seat. Tonight the kin taught the house that again. The flute taught the jars to breathe better. The drum learned humility. The wrists learned that discipline hurts less than apology. And the lamp learned, as it does each night, that burning for the right length is its own music. Outside, the street's ensemble resumes its older repertoire, a wheel confessing to splinters, a dog negotiating with a god no one else likes, a neighbor's throat clearing a path through phlegm and pride. Inside, the room keeps a last silence cupped in its corners like seed in a jar. It belongs to no clerk and no inspector. It belongs to spring and to the unnamed hour between being poor and being asleep. Through it, the house will make its morning, measured, level, not kind, but fair in the way a true bushel is fair. Music did not make life less miserable. It made misery schedule itself, speak softer, and sit where it was told. In this lane, that is what passes for grace.